Welcome, welcome. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm so excited to be here with you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Ponce City Market and Dance and Goats for hosting us. Thank you to, of course, the community and all of the guests who are here in person. Thank you to those that are tuning in on the live stream on Facebook. And of course, thank you to our speakers who are going to go on in just a moment. I am proud to be the director of the Old Fourth Ward Economic Security Task Force. My name is Hope Wolensack. Our diverse coalition over the past 6 months has been exploring questions about economic security, guaranteed income, and racial justice. Among many topics, we focused in on the potential of basic income or guaranteed income in Atlanta, and specifically in the Old Fourth Ward. Of course, we are standing in the neighborhood of one of Atlanta's most famous residents, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Here in the Old Fourth Ward, where he grew up, where he preached, we're returning to this critical conversation at a critical time in our country's history. So some 60 years later, after he first wrote about guaranteed income, we are returning to this conversation. And so just a few statistics that I think really drive this work and many who are engaged in this conversation. Here in Georgia, 1 in 3 Georgians don't make enough to live above the poverty line. 1 in 3. 1 in 4 Atlantans live in poverty. And that statistic is even worse in the Old Fourth Ward, King's own neighborhood. So we have to ask ourselves, in the shadow of Martin Luther King and his work, how do we grapple with these statistics? Our initiative has been exploring solutions to ensure that financial stability is a reality for every single person who lives in the Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta, and beyond. We'll share more about our work at the end of today's program, but we thank you all for being here and entering this conversation with a willing and open mind, especially given the circumstances going on across the country. It is now my pleasure to introduce Mayor Franklin, the former mayor of Atlanta, and co-chair of the Old Fourth Ward Economic Security Task Force.
Thank you. I haven't done an outside event since I was running for office. But I guess we're all running for office, right? We're going to vote? January 5th? Already voted? How many have already voted? All right, let's get everybody else out to the polls. We can do this. We can do this. But I am pleased to join our council member and the members of the task force today, and even to do it in a little chilly weather, because this is an important topic for us. Maybe not for us personally, but certainly for our neighbors and friends and families. And for too many people in the city of Atlanta, and frankly, too many people in the United States of America. This is a topic that matters to us because we care about other people. It's a topic that matters to us because we know, but for the grace of God, there go I. This is a topic that matters to us because we know America is great, but it cannot be great if everyone does not have full access to everything that America offers. A decent place to live, an ability to buy the food that you need, an ability to support your children and families, an ability to contribute to your community, the opportunity to vote without obstacles, any kind of obstacles. So we know this is an important topic, and we want to thank our council member, Mayor Farokhi, for bringing it to the fore and making it possible for us to have a full conversation with facts and research, not just ideas and opinions, that allow us to say that America can do better, Atlanta can do better, and the Fourth Ward can do better. So while progress has been made in Atlanta, and we won't dwell on that, we'll just cheer for all the good things that have already happened. Let's hear it. All right. So we're here to talk about what hadn't happened. We have a long way to go. Atlanta has the highest rates of income inequality of any large city in the United States. I remember the day of the census in the 1980s when I was working for Andrew Young, when it became really clear that in Atlanta, that some 23% of the people who lived in Atlanta at the time were living below the poverty level in terms of income. I remember the day we got those statistics, and I remember having conversations with community leaders where if you really talked to other community leaders, there would be a lot of people arguing whether they were in that 23%. Another 10 or 15% who felt so close to the edge economically that they couldn't make it from day to day, week to week, and month to month. We've tried a lot of solutions. We've talked a lot about solutions. Some have worked, but unfortunately, inequality is pervasive, and it is too difficult, way too difficult, to make it work financially despite hard work, honest work, 40-hour work. When I went to the city of Atlanta in 2002, there were 600 city employees, 600 city employees who were making so little money. They were making about $17,000 a year working a 40-hour week. 2002, it became really clear that even the city of Atlanta was falling short. We need to consider bold solutions. That's why you're here in the cold today. The election is important for shaping the outcomes that we want to see for ourselves and our communities. Our vote is our way to make change. And Georgia, we don't want just Georgia on your mind. We want Georgia at the ballot box. Inequality is being amplified, and how we respond to this crisis will reverberate for generations. It is not what we do for just for ourselves, but for our children's children's children. And we know that income inequality has lasted too long in the Fourth Ward, in the city of Atlanta, in the state of Georgia, and the United States of America. As there are national calls for emergency cash relief, and we're for that, right? We want emergency solutions. $900 billion doesn't sound like a lot, and it certainly is not enough. But we also need to consider the role cash can play helping families and communities who perpetually, day in and day out, regardless of how hard they work or how many jobs they work, cannot make ends meet right here in our own community. So I join you today, not just, being a former mayor is worth about a martyr token and a dime. Maybe it shouldn't even be worth that much, depending on how you feel about public service. But the bottom line is that we are at an important point in American history, and it doesn't take millions of people to change that. It takes a few. So a few days ago, Georgia was able to cast its ballots for the president-elect Biden by 12,000 or so votes out of 5 million. Every vote counts, every opinion counts, and you count, and we thank you for coming. I am delighted now to welcome to the podium the next speaker, who's gonna be better than me, because she's gonna be prepared. Okay, Lynn Austin Leonard is a task force member. She's someone with whom I have argued and debated and listened to. I know her commitment to community because I have seen it and heard it, and she is here to move our program forward. Lynn, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Franklin. Good afternoon, and again, welcome to an armchair conversation with Andrew Yang and Councilman Mayor Farokhi. As a longtime resident of the Old Fourth Ward, I am extremely proud and blessed to have been selected to serve as a member of an esteemed group of 27 local and national leaders who together make up the Old Fourth Ward Economic Security Task Force. As a spirit-driven person, I shared with Amir early on that how I feel about where I live impacts the way you feel about where you live. I was raised to believe that we have a God-given purpose to care about one another. Having witnessed 20 years of intense gentrification in the Old Fourth Ward, it has become less affordable for longtime residents to stay within this wonderful historic neighborhood, a neighborhood that I call home. As a marketing communications professional, I must add that while living in a community where $1 million homes, $600,000 townhomes are juxtaposed next to the largest remaining concentration of lower-income housing in the Southeast, I know that the change in diversity and economic status of its residents demands a change in perception of our neighbors if we are to move forward as a socially just and racially diverse community and society. We all must change our thinking internally and externally, our understanding and our belief system surrounding the term or concept of poverty. Poverty is not a lack of character. Poverty is simply a lack of cash. Thus, it is my pleasure to serve with so many like-minded people on this task force. People who believe, if I may paraphrase, it takes a village to raise and uplift a village, as well as to encourage each and every member of the village to uplift themselves. We have all come together to force changes in policy and demonstrate that fighting for the least or lesser of these brings a greater benefit to the community, city, state, and nation as a whole. With that said, it is my honor to introduce Amir Farokhi, a lifelong Atlantan who has built a reputation as a thoughtful, pragmatic leader focused on policy over politics. Throughout his career, he has committed to community engagement. After serving with him on this task force, I say, thank you for this incredible experience and for listening to the voices of this community. Andrew Yang, who having been among a myriad of 2020 Democratic presidential candidates, Mr. Yang is quick to proclaim he is not a politician. He is, in fact, a successful entrepreneur, husband, father, and most importantly, a thought-provoking nonprofit leader. Currently, his nonprofit organization that he is currently affiliated with, Humanity Forward, seeks to build a movement to rewrite the rules, pushing for public policy solutions to the biggest problems of the 21st century. Its singular focus right now is on enacting direct cash relief to help families deal with the effects of the pandemic by creating an unconditional basic income feeling that as a society, we believe you are okay. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my neighbor friend, City Councilman Amir Farokhi, and Mr. Andrew Yang.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. First, before we dive into a conversation with our special guest, I want to thank Mayor Franklin, who has been instrumental in lifting our city from a national one to an international one, and whose work continues to have a positive effect a decade after she left office. And we're grateful for her leadership and her wisdom. And this task force would not be what it is without you. So thank you, Mayor Franklin. And I want to thank Ms. Alston Leonard, one of my neighbors, for being such a firecracker and an instrumental part of this task force. Thank you for everything you've given as well. Welcome to all of you who are here in person and on the live stream. On behalf of the Old Fourth Ward Economic Security Task Force and all the residents of the neighborhood and of Atlanta, I want to extend a warm welcome to you, Andrew. Thank you for joining us. This has been a remarkable year, and we're really grateful that you and your family have come down for most of the month. I know you started today in the neighborhood at the King Birth Home with members of the King family. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like, particularly in light of the fact that Dr. King called for a guaranteed income late in his life?
Hello, Atlanta. How are you? Old Fourth Ward. It's a thrill to be here. I did start the day with my wife, Evelyn, who's here today, and Martin Luther King III and his wife, Andrea. And they gave us a tour not just of the King family home, but also of the church where Dr. King grew up, and then the King Center, the exterior and the resting place of Dr. King and his wife. And it was an incredible experience. I'm sure you all have been there. It certainly felt very special having Dr. King's son, Martin, talk about his childhood memories in both the church and the family home. And one of the stories they told was of Dr. King's looking out from his family home and seeing on the right some very nice houses and on the left some not as nice houses. And I think that's something that we just heard about here in the Old Fourth Ward, is that people are looking out their windows and seeing affluence and wealth on one side of the street and then people who are struggling on the other. That's not unique to this community, though I sense it is more extreme in this community than it is in some others because of the growth that Atlanta's experienced. The time we spent in Dr. King's childhood home, it was like a trip through time. I guess you've seen it because it's been preserved in 1930. And I had a glimpse into what it would be like to grow up in that home and run up and down the stairs, and how much has changed and not changed since that era, where there are so many modern conveniences, and one of the elements of being in the family home is you see their, frankly, kind of ancient washing machine with the scrub board, and you see like the ancient oven, and you see the ancient ice box where someone delivered ice, and then they use that like several times a day. So you think, wow, we've really come a long way. But then in other aspects, it feels like the inequality has gotten worse and more extreme, where if you looked at the nice houses of that era and then the not as nice houses, there was probably more in common between those two ways of life than there are today if you were to look at the affluent homes and the families therein and the folks who are struggling. So it was a profound backdrop for this conversation.
Great. So you mentioned a little bit about the dynamics of this neighborhood. It's a special neighborhood. It has a lot of history, primarily over the decades, a working class African American neighborhood that has changed rapidly the last 20 years. And we see, for folks of all stripes, generational, racial, et cetera, that no matter how hard they work, it's harder and harder to make it in this country. And we decided to launch this task force looking at guaranteed income as a potential intervention for helping people live a dignified life. But when I picked up the phone and asked people to join the task force, everyone said yes immediately. But I realized pretty quickly that wouldn't have happened if not for your presidential campaign just happening.
Oh, thank
you,
it's
Amir.
True. That's very nice of you.
And I mean, you have. It's not a new idea, but it's one that has found its moment. And I think it has entered the national conversation in ways that maybe you didn't even expect when you launched your campaign. And so I guess my question to you is, can you talk a little bit about how you came to embrace this notion of cash transfer, guaranteed income? And over the last, say, 18 to 24 months, have your views on it changed at all? Have you had doubts? Have you kind of evolved your thinking on it at all?
It's certainly not my idea. Dr. King was fighting for guaranteed income when he was assassinated. in the 60s. So I told jokes about how, look, this is what Dr. King fought for, but it took me to kind of revive it in American life, because I think since Dr. King's passing to now, we've gotten collectively brainwashed into a certain version of capitalism and market-based thinking, and we see ourselves as inputs into the system, really at a much, much higher level than was true in the 60s and 70s. And even I'm guilty of it when you talk about embracing the grind or like the brand of you or whatever. It's like we kind of see ourselves as economic actors all of the time. And so the wisdom of Dr. King just needed to be awakened or rekindled in 2020. I'm certainly grateful for everyone who supported my campaign. And my goal was that I could take the torch and others would pick it up because I knew it would not be me. And I'm thrilled to say that since my campaign ended, now 55% of Americans are for a universal basic income. It was not that high when I was running. I wish it were. Maybe I'd you know. And 74% are for cash relief. And since I suspended, literally dozens of mayors, including Keisha Lance Bottoms, but also the mayors of Los Angeles, Newark, St. Paul, and on, have come out for basic income. A lot of those mayors are black progressive leaders. And then a group of spiritual leaders have come out recently for cash relief. So there's been this burgeoning movement that has arisen. I've spent the last several months lobbying for stimulus checks to be part of a relief package. So when you ask whether my thinking has evolved, a lot of the things I was campaigning on have actually now transpired in real life. You know, like I know when you first heard about me, you were like, okay, he's kind of like the futurist Asian man. And then unfortunately, the coronavirus just accelerated the clock, where we went through 10 years worth of economic transformation in 10 weeks, or the equivalent. So universal basic income then went from this interesting idea to something crucial for our very survival. And I'm very proud to say, thanks to some folks who've been doing very hard work behind the scenes and some legislators that have stepped up, it looks like stimulus checks are going to be part of this relief package that's going to pass this week. So thank you to everyone who helped make that happen. And I have probably several conversations with members of Congress every single day where I try to convey to them, look, 74% of Americans are for this, majority of both parties. It's completely obvious. Everyone in your district knows that we should be doing this. And for a lot of them, it's just seeing the numbers. It's helpful. Where they're like, oh, wow, like this is a political winner as well as a human and economic winner.
So you're underselling your role in potentially shaping this new stimulus bill. He's been on the phone lobbying very hard, members of Congress, to include a cash transfer or a one-time payment to folks. Over the scope of this year, how have those conversations evolved? I mean, how quickly have you seen members of Congress, maybe accelerated by the pandemic, embrace this notion that whether it's a one-time payment or a series of payments, is needed as almost a baseline for stability in our country?
Oh, everyone knows that I'm for more than a one-time payment. I'd like it to be recurring, and that still is the goal. But I am thrilled that of the two packages that will have passed between the CARES Act and this new one, I don't know if there's a fun acronym for this one yet. I don't know if they've come up with one. It's not the HEROES Act, that's for sure, because the HEROES Act was much more robust. We'll see what acronym they come up with. It needs a name. But the fact that the two relief packages that will have passed both will include stimulus checks, I think is an incredibly strong precedent to set for the times to come. And one of the things I'm going to be arguing for is recurring cash payments until our economy and labor market return to some measure of health, which is going to be a long time from now. So one trigger I'm going to pose as just an example would be like a true unemployment rate of sub 5% nationally, something along those lines. It's going to, in all likelihood, be years before we get back there. So to me, that could be a possible approach. What's evolved for me, Amir, is how much the conversation has changed in the last number of weeks and months because of the pandemic and because of the fact that when you're looking at allocating, let's call it $1 trillion, you settle on cash directly to people pretty quickly. Because if you think about it, let's say we were all members of Congress. Wouldn't that be delightful? We'll make Amir the majority leader. And so then you look up and say, okay, you have like a multi-trillion-dollar hole in the economy. You're going to try and fill it with, let's call it a trillion. And then you have choices as to what the allocation of the $1 trillion is. So here are some choices. Unemployment insurance. I think most of us would agree that's a good idea. If you don't have a job, you need financial resources. State and local government aid. I think most of us would agree that's a good idea. You can't have state and local governments firing people in the middle of a pandemic when the need for services goes up. Cash directly to people. I think most of us would agree that's a good idea. And it turns out that of these ideas, this is the most popular. Like if you actually poll people, they'll like things, but they'll love this one. And so in my mind, my job has been to try and increase the allocation of funds from these relief packages, because literally, it's kind of arbitrary. Like the Senate had a threshold because of Mitch McConnell, who were trying to demote to minority leader, and thank you for voting for Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff. How many of you have already voted? All right, if you don't have your hand up, you definitely need to make sure you vote. And if you did have your hand up, you gotta bug some other people to vote too, because we need to get every single vote out. So let's say the threshold's $900 billion. To me, that's completely arbitrary. The CARES Act was $2.2 trillion. The HEROES Act was, I think, even at that level or a bit higher. So job number one is to try and get them to have like a high appetite for putting money into the economy, because it was $900 billion, and I'm thrilled. But like, could it have been $1.2 trillion? Sure. Could it have been 1.5? It's just a collective will. And then the second thing is, how is that money actually allocated? And I'm going to suggest that money to people is like the highest impact, highest return way to go. Because even if you're putting money into a city or state government, where is that going to go optimally? Into the hands of the people that work for the city and state, like in the form of as city and state employees. So, if you're going to look for like the best impact, you would give it to people.
Last week, your most popular, you're a prodigious tweeter, but your most popular tweet, 175,000 plus likes, read, "I can't wait for the day when we can't blame everything on Trump. Our problems run deep." Can you talk a little bit about what motivated you to send that and what that means for this moment? Are these solutions we're talking about, do you worry about them being kind of time limited because people's attention span will drift otherwise, or can we actually make these big pushes that we're talking about?
Well, I'm hopeful that we can hold our Democratic leaders accountable for trying to solve our problems and improve our way of life. It's why it's vital that we demote Mitch McConnell, because then if it's like a negotiation, then things get more difficult. But the truth is that our way of life has been deteriorating regardless of which party's in control of government. I'm a numbers guy, and it's pretty basic. Like, has our income been going up? Not really, no matter who's been in power. Has the cost of housing gone up? Yes. Education? Yes. Healthcare? Oh, yes. Has financial insecurity risen? Yes. So regardless of who's been in power, there's been this pervasive rot in our economy, and we need to change that. Now, we all know I campaigned for Joe. I'm thrilled that he's going to be our next president. But I'm also thrilled that we can start doing the hard work of actually trying to solve the problems that led to Donald Trump and the problems that so many people are experiencing. 60% of Americans think that both parties are out of touch at this point. And I think that I'm campaigning for Democrats. I think there's a massive gulf between Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff and their opponents. But we do need a system that's more responsive to the needs that we see around us in our families and communities every day. It's one reason why I'm so passionate about basic income, because I know that's going to help people live better, stronger, healthier lives. And I congratulate you, Amir, and everyone who's on this task force for helping to make it possible here in your community. So let me tell you what I heard about Amir before I showed up here today. I heard he was great, and I also heard he was really good looking. So then when I showed up and he had a mask on, I was like, I wonder if he'll take his mask off, and then I'll be able to evaluate my friend's judgment. And I think we can all agree that she was right.
I wasn't expecting to be embarrassed by Andrew Yang today, but tell your friend thank you. I want to ask you a couple more questions, and we're going to open it up for questions from all of you. And I think, are we taking questions online as well? Okay. So if you're on the live stream, feel free to type in a question. We'll ask them from there. You and your family came down here to help get out the vote for Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff as we move toward a January 5th runoff election. Glad to see so many folks have voted. I got to get out with my wife and vote in the next 8 days or so early. What have you been hearing from folks? And how have you been framing the election for them?
Knocking on doors has been a lot of fun. There was one time where I said, hey, are you getting ready to vote? And then the person said, I've already voted. And then I was like, ooh, like a customer. Like I gotta be like, no, you must vote again. It's January 5th. There are a lot of people that are focused on this election. Others who, frankly, it feels like getting their attention is very positive. You can't match the energy of a presidential election, I don't think. The best you can do is come close to energizing your voters at that level. And we've seen already that if everyone comes out, then we can win. And so that to me is the challenge. I will say that the case that Republicans are making seems very, very clear, and it's something that we must defeat. You've all seen the ads. I'm now going to give my rendition of David Perdue ad. Radical socialist John Ossoff wants to team up with radical leftist Nancy Pelosi and radical leftist AOC to destroy America. The only chance to save America is to vote for David Perdue. Vote David Perdue to save America. Vote David Perdue to save America. I approve this message. I'm not even exaggerating. That's literally, you've seen the ads, right? Raise your hand if you've seen that stuff. And so you're like, wow, is this like the strangest, most fear-mongering case for your leaders? And the question I have that I think the entire country's future rests on is does that case work? You know what I mean? We have to see to it that case does not work. Am I right, Atlanta? So that's what's at stake in this election, to me, is whether or not a very simple fear-based approach is actually winning electoral politics. Because if it is winning electoral politics, you're just going to keep on seeing it. But if you can show that stuff does not win, that it actually alienates and loses, then we have a chance to potentially start transforming a political culture that is getting more and more toxic and noxious.
I want to take a step back to this moment and guaranteed income before wrapping it up with a lighter question. In politics, big things only tend to happen when there's a crisis. And right now we can argue we're in a crisis. And I guess my question to you is, how do we get the biggest possible thing to happen so that when we look back 10 years from now, we wasted this opportunity to actually move the ball in a pretty aggressive way? How do we seize this moment, whether it's on guaranteed income or otherwise, right now?
I think you hit the nail on the head that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And I'm not someone that wants to ever try and paint a terrible situation as positive. I mean, this is a terrible, tragic time in our country. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have died. Millions, tens of millions have lost their jobs. I saw a stat that said 1 in 4 Americans is either unemployed or working at a near poverty level. I mean, the pain and suffering is everywhere. And so the question is, are we going to be able to accelerate meaningful solutions as well as the challenges? And it's been a very hard 8 months for people who have an optimistic case about that because we haven't seen anything out of Congress. And I love local community efforts. So there's something difficult going on in American life today that you all are a counterexample to, and I applaud you for it. which is that folks are focusing more on what's going on in Washington at a national level than they are at a local level, even though what goes on at a local level most of the time is more impactful on your life. You know what I mean? And there are a number of reasons for that. In a place like Atlanta, you still have local journalism, so thank goodness for that. But over 2,000 local papers have disappeared around the country, and our attention has gone with them. So when you ask, Amir, how can we meaningfully alleviate the suffering? When you're looking at problems of this scale, I do think the federal government is the first place to look, because they're the only ones that can meaningfully send out hundreds of billions of dollars in a time when millions and millions of Americans could use the relief. And then after that, I would bring it down to the local level and see what communities can do. Like when I talk to people about trying to help, now I'm saying, hey, donate to the Ossoff and Warnock campaigns. But other than that, I try and start them in two ways. Like one, let's try and activate Congress to get the big macro relief done. And number two, donate to your local food bank or food pantry. Like donate to a local nonprofit, because I know they're hurting. To me, those are the two best approaches to make something positive happen that will actually help someone in the near term.
Last question for me, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. You brought your family down here for most of the last month. Thank you for spending time with us in Georgia. We like to think of ourselves as a hospitable bunch.
I've had a great time here in Georgia.
Well, that's my question. Has anything surprised you? And what do you take back to New York from your time here in Georgia?
I've had a blast. The thing that surprised me most was Buford Highway and the quality of the Asian food here in Atlanta. No, so if you're from New York and have spent a lot of time in California, you kind of think like, oh, I know good Asian food because there's like a Koreatown and the rest of it. But you all are so fortunate. Like your Asian food is as good or better than any place else in the country. I have no idea how this happened. But Evelyn and I have been going on like a mini food tour every chance we get, where we went to a Malaysian restaurant. It was called Food Terminal. Food Terminal was delicious. And then we had Szechuan food at Masterpiece. Have you had Masterpiece Szechuan food? It is top notch. So this is the stuff that really surprised us. I came here to try and help the country and help these campaigns win, and I ended up on a mini food tour. So, it was delightful. But the people have been warm and friendly. I've made some new friends and connected with old ones. I've had an incredible time here, but I will say the capstone of my family's time here is winning these freaking elections on January 5th. So will you do everything you can to make that happen? Because I will say the food tour will just go out the window if we lose those races. I would gladly give back the food tour in return for a couple of victories on January 5th.
Great. So I want to turn it over to Hope, who I should have thanked at the top. This task force and this work that we're doing in the neighborhood would not be as far along or as wise and expert as it is without all of her hard work. So thank you, Hope. And I'll let you run the show from here.
Thank you, everyone. I will take a few questions from the audience. We'll also take questions from folks who are on the live stream. And so our first question comes from the live stream. Adeline, I believe that's how her name is pronounced. First, she says, "Happy birthday, Amir."
Thank you.
Because it's his birthday today.
Wow.
Yay. And this question asks, what are some of the ways to fund guaranteed income or basic income?
Well, I will let you finish. As a local elected official, the harsh reality is that at the local level, we don't have the resources to do it. And so more often than not, the answer is going to come at the federal level. That's the simple answer. The federal government's going to have to lead on this. There may be opportunities for some states to do it, and the private sector can help fund some pilot programs, but at scale, it's going to come from the federal government. At least that's been my view of things.
Amir, I'm going to push this back onto you. Check it out. All right. So my organization has funded a small basic income pilot in a town called Hudson, New York, and we got private philanthropists to put up $375,000, and then we put in $300,000, which is enough to do at least a bit of good. And this has been true for the 25 or so cities that have mayors for a guaranteed income. So Keisha Lance Bottoms, I don't know what her approach is, but I will say that I know that mayors for a guaranteed income received $15 million in funding to be distributed among those 25 cities. So let's call that like $500,000 each, which gives you at least a jumping off point to do feasibility studies and like population IDs and some other things. And I ran a nonprofit for 7 years. And there are always private sources of capital if you can help activate them and maybe do some kind of matching. So there are different resources you can try and plug into. I agree with you at scale, you need the feds. But we're doing things in towns like Hudson in like the 6 and 7 figure range. And I think there are enough folks who are interested in innovative ways to alleviate poverty and in the welfare of neighborhoods that you can cobble together resources because I've seen these mayors for a guaranteed income and each of them essentially has a different approach. So I'd say there are like 25 different approaches out of the 25 mayors who are taking it on.
And I'll just add before you get to the next question, that's what we're trying to do here in the neighborhood is really lay into the private philanthropy locally and nationally.
That's what I'm talking about, Amir. Make your pitch to the local philanthropist.
We too
You
can
know
have
what
a
you're
guaranteed
talking
income
about.
pilot in the neighborhood with you being part of it.
Yes,
So.
who's the local philanthropist?
Yeah.
I don't know who it is.
Terrific. So if there are questions from the in-person audience, I believe Chantel is going to go first. And then if there are other questions, just raise your hand and we'll signal you up. Just make sure you speak into the microphone. That way our streaming audience can also hear the question. So.
Thank you, Mr. Yang, for joining us today. My name is Chantel Glenn, a member of the task force in representing the Old Fourth Ward as a resident as well, and the philanthropic sector as well, speaking of philanthropy. But you kind of touched on this and just how, your agenda influence local agendas and the mayors around the nation coming out in support of guaranteed income. And I know in the task force, we've talked a lot about how to push past even a pilot and, touch on other things that kind of collectively support, a long-term, more permanent program such as you've been advocating. So can you inform what else this task force needs to be thinking about broader up to a national level to better inform and support this agenda?
I'd love to. Thank you for your work. So I do think that the risk capital in this domain tends to be philanthropy. So what you want to do is you want to try and match philanthropy and then local public resources. And the local public resources could be just assigned to a pilot, even though I know budgets are strapped right now. Or it could be from some existing resources too. I've seen at least in some other cities where they had a pool of money that they repurposed for this. And so you could have a pool of money that's meant to go to anti-poverty initiatives, and you're like, well, this is an anti-poverty initiative, and then you transfer it over. And then the goal would be to connect with federal pipes over time. But you all are activists, organizers, entrepreneurs, and the way this stuff happens is you like set a vision, and then you start trying to galvanize energy and resources around that vision. And sometimes you end up surprising even yourself, where you're like, wow. So when I ran a nonprofit, it took me some getting used to because it's uncomfortable asking people for money for a while. Though in this case, it's easier because you're asking on behalf of people in your community. So I remember the first time we sat down for like a capital campaign. And I remember myself thinking, oh, okay, like, let's say we needed $5 million or something like that. And then we sat down with some professionals. And then they were like, you would never, ever ask for what you need. You need to have a capital campaign that's at least $25 million. And I said, interesting. And then they said, and you have to have the first like domino already there in place so that you can make an announcement. And then when you go do meetings with folks, then you can be like, hey, this person is already on board. Don't you want to join the train? So in your case, the hardest part for anything is to try and find that first mover. And then if you have the first mover and the vision, then things get a lot easier.
Thank you so much, Amir. It's very nice to meet you. Appreciate the opportunity. So, pilots over the years have been done, projects have been done for UBI, like studies, and my limited knowledge is that they never go all the way. How long will it take to create proof of concept so that, I mean, I get it, but how long is it going to take before we have the statistical analysis to really demonstrate its value?
So I will say to you all, maybe this is probably not public information, but I happen to know that there's a large-scale universal basic income study that's already started, and they're not actually being public about it because they don't want to corrupt the data. That's how freaking hardcore they are. They're doing a control group. I have no idea how you do a control group in this context. They have a raft of PhDs they're going around. So this study got started, and they're doing it over a 2-year period. So we should get that data in about 2 years. The pilot that we're running in Hudson, the only distinguishing factor to it is that we're going for 5 years because we just think that having a long-term data set could be useful. So you should not feel like you here in the 4th Ward, you need to be that robust data set necessarily. Because what I expect to happen over the next number of months and years is that different data sets will start hitting the radar based upon different studies. I will suggest that the truest data set right now is the population of the United States of America, because roughly 200 million people got $1,200 in like April, May, June. And anyone who's looked at it was like, this has been great. There have been a number of economists who said something that I found funny, but was also profound. They said, stimulus checks reduced poverty rate. And they treated it like it was revelatory. And then I was like, well, that would probably happen if you sent everyone money. So the biggest data set really has been this large-scale stimulus. But economists who've looked at it have been blown away by how positive it's been. And it's debunked so many of the objections like this. I mean, I ran for president on this stuff. So what were the main objections I heard? Number one, where are you going to get the money? And then now everyone's like, okay, like that one's gone because, clearly, if we need to, we can write $2.2 trillion. The other thing I would suggest about the CARES Act, people got $1,200. Those $1,200 checks were less than 10% of the $2.2 trillion that went out. So don't let anyone fool you to be like, oh, that went to us. It did not. The vast majority of that $2.2 trillion went to big corps and making financial actors whole and the rest of it. So that was objection number one, where are we going to get the money? Objection number two, people will use the money poorly, which also does not stand up to any scrutiny now because everyone got the money, and you know what we did with it? Like food, fuel, like keeping a roof over your head, like the basics. The third objection I got, which is related to the second, was that I cannot tell you how many times I heard this be like, oh, if you give people money, it's going to make them lazy. And then now that person got the check at some point, and they realize it did nothing to their personality but make them a little bit less stressed out. So the real-time trial we're getting is actually the United States of America. So what you're going to do here in the 4th Ward is going to be immensely positive and demonstrative, but you should know that there are massive data sets that are being compiled all over the country at this point.
Yes, we wait for the next question. One of my favorite responses to the lazy argument is just to turn the question back on people and say, if you got $500 a month or $1,000 a month, would you stop working? Of course, the answer is no. Right?
Yeah, of course not.
Yeah. You can sleep soundly at night. That's what's important.
Hey, my name is Munir. Thank you, Councilman Mayor Farokhi, for bringing this important conversation to us, and Andrew for everything that you've done. I think there's perhaps a value in even a moral, imperative of guaranteed income, but there's also this idea of independence and entrepreneurship that can come from it. And in Atlanta, everybody has a hustle, and to convert that hustle into an entrepreneurship, I think something like this is very important because it takes a lot of risk and privilege to go into that. What role do you think this can play into converting and helping individuals become more entrepreneurial and independent as well?
Hey, Munir, were you and I on a Zoom last night?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so. Look at that. I spent 6.5 years trying to help support entrepreneurs. And it's a very, very rare entrepreneur who's on their last legs and having trouble making material ends meet and then turns around and is like, I'm going to start a business. That is not normal at all. Ordinarily, it's someone who has a bit of security and visibility and some like cushion. And those are the folks who then turn around and say, I'm going to take a risk and start a business. It's one reason why I ran for president, was that I realized that it was impossible to support entrepreneurship at the appropriate level unless you were to dramatically change the way resources are distributed and experienced in our country. This is particularly true for women and communities of color who end up having lower levels of access to savings and capital and mentorship and like a bunch of other things. So if you're honest about trying to make entrepreneurship a real option for more people, you need something like a basic income. So I make a lot of pro business arguments for basic income. I say to folks, look, you know what doesn't work you know what makes capitalism work better is when your customers have money. Like that's like a pretty basic one. If you were to say to folks, like, you know what's going to help people start businesses? If they know they're not going to die if the business fails. And also, if their customers have money. So there are all of these like it's not socialism, it's capitalism where income doesn't start at zero. Like, there are all of these pro-business and enterprise arguments you can make that are 100% correct. That if you talk to folks, they're like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. So I love the inversion of the frame where this is not some kind of charity, this is human empowerment. This is agency. This is the ability for people to actually get their heads up and begin pursuing their genuine aspirations instead of being trapped in a subsistence role, which unfortunately is the way a lot of our current programs are designed. Our current programs are designed to be kind of punitive and overly bureaucratic and kind of dehumanizing. Like they look at you and be like, hey, like if you need this, then like, you know, I'm going to try and punish you in various ways, big and small. Like, and that's the kind of thing, I think that is as fundamental as the actual money. It's like if you see everyone as having intrinsic value and saying, look, you're not a supplicant, you're the owner and shareholder of the richest society in the history of the world, and you can do whatever you want. Like, then the ability for people to actually start businesses and pursue their dreams will shoot up immediately.
Thank you so much. Thank you both.
Thank you, Munir.
That's terrific, so powerful. Thank you. We have a ton more questions, but unfortunately, because of time, that is our last question for this evening. I just want to say thank you so much for being here. Thank you for having this conversation, especially in this space, and for advancing this movement in so many ways. Folks who are tuning in on the live stream and folks who are here, if you would like to follow our work, please go to econsecurityatl.org and you can sign up to find out more about the developments that are going to be happening in this project, especially in January. We have some really exciting things coming. Thank you all so much for being here and for tuning in. Have a great day.
Well, I want to give you a small gift before we close up. My favorite gift to give folks who come from out of town is a small book of quotations from Dr. King. So this is one. And the other is a terrific book by Rebecca Burns called Burial for a King, which is about the city of Atlanta and the week after Dr. King's death and how it pulled together to set up his funeral. So I'll leave that with you as well. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Amir.
Yeah.
Thank you, Atlanta. Let's win this thing. January 5th. Do it for all of us.